Chapter 1. Melinda Chase leaned forward as she talked about her plans for the restaurant she now managed. I really want to do more with it than Michael ever did. I don't think he ever really saw the potential, and I do. Her voice was both professional and earnest as she tried to convince the owner to let her do the things she knew would make it better. Bob Quinn, owner of the restaurant and the hotel it resided in, tilted his head to one side as he listened. I think that sounds reasonable. What do you have in mind? Let's make it the fanciest restaurant in Quinn Valley. Even your family goes to the pub or out of town for a night out. Why not bring them here? I think we upscale the menu. Steak, lobster, better quality meals. We'll keep a good house burger and some chicken fingers for the kiddos and more plebeian tastes, but I want the restaurant to reflect the rest of this beautiful resort you've made here. With 4 restaurants here, you need one that serves a better cuisine. Bob's lips quirked into a smile. It is pretty incredible, isn't it? Yes, it really is. I've never seen anything like it. And the restaurant is just a place where people plop down after a day at the pool, if they don't head out and go to the pizza place or some other random restaurant in town. Melinda shook her head. We need this to be a sanctuary people want to come to for celebrations, not where people wear their wet swimsuits. She frowned for a moment. About that. Bob jumped up at that moment. Bobling. You're finally home. A man in a Marine's uniform walked to Bob and hugged him tight. Hi, Dad. Melinda watched them closely, having heard more about Bobling than she'd ever wanted to know about anyone. Your mother is going to go insane. You're a day earlier than expected. Bobling shrugged. Isn't that what you taught me? Never do what people expect of you, or you'll get into a rut. Underpromise and overdeliver? It sure is. You look good. Bob looked over at Melinda, who was watching them. This is Melinda. She's taking over the restaurant here at the hotel, and we're discussing options. Bobling smiled at Melinda. Hi. I'm Jake. Melinda blinked a couple of times. I've heard you referred to as Bobling for the entire 2 years I've worked here. Jake. Please. He sat down beside Melinda in another chair. I'd love to be part of the discussion on what to do with the restaurant. Bob took his chair behind the desk again. You've never shown much of an interest in the hotel before. I'm home now. I'll be showing a lot of interest in things that will surprise you. Bobling, no, Jake, turned toward Melinda. I'd like to see some vegetarian and vegan options on the menu. So many people come to this area to get healthier, and I think we'll find they sell quite well. Also, some good lean cuts of meat, prepared without oil and using little salt. Then my dad can eat there without worrying too much. So maybe you do a vegetarian menu, with things that are also vegan clearly marked, and a heart-healthy menu on top of the other things you're planning. Melinda grinned at him. I was just about to get there in my plans for the restaurant. She was surprised to hear Bobling's ideas for the place, because she hadn't expected to like him. He'd been built up too much in her mind by everyone around her. I want to change the name, Bob. Bob frowned at her. I like the name Bob's Restaurant. I'm sure you do, but it doesn't bring people in. I'm thinking impressions. I want people to leave with a good impression. I know you like the casual restaurants in the hotel, Bob, but even the employees don't eat there. Bob sighed. You think all these changes would be good for the bottom line? I think they'd be wonderful. She caught sight of Jake nodding out of the corner of her eye. Your son agrees with me. My son has always agreed with beautiful women. Especially ones who smell like food all the time. You should see how close he is to his mother. Bob leaned back in his chair with his hands folded in front of him. Let's do it. I'll think about some advertising for it as well. Dad, let me do the advertising. I know what will sell it. And when can I start at the workout center? I'm ready to start helping people. Melinda turned to Jake, her interest piqued. Wait, what are you going to be doing in the workout center? Personal training. It probably won't appeal to a lot of the guests, but it will appeal to people in town. Lots of them get memberships to the workout center from what I recall. Bob frowned. That's changed in recent years. It's never used now. Melinda ignored Bob as she faced his son, feeling her excitement building. Really? I want a session first thing Monday morning, if you have time available. He laughed. You're the first person I've talked to about it, so sure. You let me know what time, and I'll make you sweat. Let's say 9. I have to work at 11, but I can do an hour with you, and then hit the showers. Melinda was excited to work out with him for a multitude of reasons. She wanted to get healthy, but more than that, she wanted to spend more time with the mysterious Bobling she'd heard so much about. But Bobling's mystery had nothing on Jake's sexiness. Perfect. I'll see you at 9, then. He got to his feet, holding his hand out to his father. I'm going to head out. My master sergeant got out of the Marines the same day I did, and he wants me to show him around town. I talked about it so much that he's interested in settling here. Fresh blood is exactly what Quinn Valley needs. Look at Melinda here. She's looking at something I didn't realize was broken, and she's finding ways to fix it. Yup. New people are needed in this valley of ours. Bob looked at his son for a moment. Plan on being at the house around 7 for supper. We'll surprise your mother. I'm sure she already knows I'm here, Dad. She'll pretend to be surprised, then. Bob watched as his son left, finally sitting back down and looking at Melinda. I cannot tell you how much joy it brings me to see that boy back in Quinn Valley where he belongs. Melinda smiled. I've heard a lot about him during the years I've worked here. Now, let's talk about the restaurant's decor. It's perfect for being a place where people lounge after swimming, but it's not good for people who want to take their love out for a nice night on the town. Asterisk. Jake walked through a couple of long hallways to get to the lobby of the hotel. As soon as he was there, he spotted Jackson. Raising one hand in greeting, he smiled and strode toward the other man, who was still in uniform as well, stopping before the other man and saluting. Sarge. Jackson saluted back, and then he grinned, grasping Jake's hand. If you'd re-enlisted, you'd have had my job. Oh, no one could replace you, sir. Jake smiled. Let's go see my little town. It's not quite what I expected. The way you talked, I was expecting there to be double rainbows leading you to the center of town, a golden sidewalk, and leprechauns throwing luck at you wherever you went. And none of the houses even have golden roofs. It's definitely not living up to my expectations. Jake laughed. It's home, sir. I think everyone feels the way about their home that I do. He walked out toward the parking lot. I know this town, so we'll take my truck. This is the only time I'm going to let you get away with driving me anyway, Jake. Jake stopped short when a very pregnant woman dropped something on the floor. Bobling, she squealed, throwing herself at him with gusto, ignoring the papers she dropped. Roxy. He threw his arms around her, picking her up with ease and spinning her in a circle. How's my favorite nephew doing? Roxy rolled her eyes. Better than his mother, who feels like she's dying any minute. Are we all doing dinner at the parents' tonight? To welcome the prodigal son home from his mission far away? Of course we are. Dad's trying to hide from Mom that I'm here, but we both know how well that's going to work. I don't know, if I hadn't seen recent pictures of you, I'm not sure I would have recognized you. Jake laughed, knowing he'd bulked up and looked a lot better than the teenage boy who had left so long before. Well, I have my sergeant waiting for me, so I'd better move on. He leaned down and kissed Roxy's cheek. We have years' worth of memories to catch up on tonight. He bent over, picked up everything she'd been carrying, and handed it all back to her. "Take care of that baby." "Oh, I will." Roxy took her things and waddled off. She walked very quickly as she waddled, but it was definitely a waddle. He would do his best not to tell her that, though. In a way, she reminded him of the old weebles that children had played with. His mother had some from her childhood that he and his siblings had often enjoyed. They wobbled, but they could never tip over. He sure hoped Roxy wouldn't tip over while she was so big. "Bobling, huh?" Jackson asked, a huge grin on his face. Jake rolled his eyes, groaning softly. "Yes. Unfortunately. My dad's a Bob, so when they named me Robert Jr., everyone started calling me Bobling. It's awful, and I absolutely refuse to let anyone keep going with that name. I feel like I should order a 'hello, my name is' sticker, or maybe a whole pack of them." They continued walking toward his truck, and he stopped beside it. "It's just a rental for today. I'm buying a truck as soon as I get the chance." He slipped into the driver's seat. "I'm just going to give you the quick tour. We could easily walk it, but I'm a civilian now, and I can drive if I feel like it." He knew he would get sick of driving and want to walk again in a week or two, but for that moment, it felt good to not have to walk everywhere. Jackson shrugged. "Just don't let yourself get soft, Maureen." "I'll do my very best." He started the drive down Main Street, commenting on the different businesses along the way. He planned to skip right over Earth Mother, but Jackson spotted it. "What is that place?" Jackson asked, staring in wonder. Probably because there were now phallic-shaped crystals in the window of the store. Jake couldn't help but wonder if Ambrosia even knew what they were. "It's a crystal shop owned by, well, I'll let you see for yourself." He parallel parked on the street in front of the store and got out. "Come on." Jackson jumped out of the passenger side. "I don't know what is drawing me to this place so completely, but I feel like I have to see it." Jake wondered if it was the penises in the window, but he said nothing. Opening the door, he walked in and looked around him. It was different than he remembered, but that was no surprise at all. Ambrosia rearranged everything in the place every other week, it seemed. As if thinking her name had made her appear, Ambrosia flitted into the room, wearing something that looked straight out of the 60s. The backroom was sectioned off by beads of all things. "How may I help you today?" Ambrosia asked, sounding mysterious. Or at least trying to sound mysterious. Jake knew she put on that voice for tourists. Jackson stared at her in awe. "I'm interested in buying a couple of rocks," he said. "Rocks? We don't sell rocks here." Ambrosia sounded offended that he would call her precious merchandise something as pedestrian as rocks. "These are all crystals, and each one has a tiny little fairy who lives inside. The fairies decide who should know about the powers held by each crystal. Let me show you." Jackson followed her as if mesmerized. "I think I'm in love," he whispered to Jake, who wanted to check his temperature. "Please, show me anything you think might interest me, including your phone number." Ambrosia smiled at him, but she looked a little alarmed as well. She probably hadn't been asked for her phone number by a man she'd just met in more than 20 years. "I think your heart chakra should be opened more before you can think about getting my phone number." She pulled a heart-shaped pink rock, crystal, Jake reminded himself, out of a display case and handed it to Jackson. "This is rose quartz, and its whole purpose is healing hearts, both figuratively and physically. You see, the rose quartz has been gifted with the ability to open a person's heart in a way that nothing else can." She looked down at the stone in her hand with a smile. "Just imagine what the fairy in the crystal would say to you if you had the ability to hear it. You see, the fairies only talk to worthy people." "Are you worthy?" "I'll take it," Jackson said. "If you think my heart needs to be opened, then that's just what I'll do." He leaned on the display case, moving closer toward her, while Jake watched in awe and fear for his friend. How about dinner tonight? I eat dinner every night, Ambrosia said primly. I'll wrap this for you? How about eating dinner with me tonight? He asked. I'll take you anywhere you want to go. I'm not sure. You're a virtual stranger to me. Jake knew he had to vouch for his friend, though he didn't think anything good could possibly come of it. Miss Ambrosia, you know me. I'm Bob Quinn's boy, Jake. Bob Quinn's boy is Bobling, she argued. Jake sighed. Well, I was Bobling as a boy, but I started using my middle name in the military, and that's Jacob, shortened to Jake. He hated having to explain why he had a normal name. What was wrong with this town? He loved it, but the people were set in their ways. There was no doubt about that. Jackson here was my commanding officer in the Marines. He's as good a man as you'll ever meet. I think if you want to go to supper with him, it will be perfectly safe. Ambrosia pursed her lips, looking at Bobling. I like the name Bobling. It makes you sound like a little duck off the old block. That's fine, ma'am, but consider my friend. Jake knew he couldn't let her get lost in discussing his name, because she would never give Jackson an answer if she did that. Jackson took Ambrosia's hand in his. Please let me take you to supper tonight. I promise it will be the most wonderful evening of your entire life. Don't think you can talk me out of my flower, just because you're a charmer, Mr. Jackson. It's Jackson James, ma'am, but you can call me anything you want. Heck, if you want to call me Bobling, I'll answer to it. Why would I want to call you Bobling? She asked. You are a very confusing man. Ambrosia frowned at him as if he was a child who needed to be reprimanded. Jackson nodded emphatically. I know I am. I'm very sorry for that. I'll try to be less confusing over supper. Ambrosia sighed. Will you leave me alone to finish cleaning my store if I say yes? Oh, yes. I'd be happy to. All right. My store closes promptly at 6, and you may pick me up then. She eyed him for a moment. I promise you that I will be wearing my protective crystals, though. I need to guard my heart against men like you. I think you'd probably want to guard your flower, too, ma'am. He winked at her. I'll see you at 6, then. I'll probably be parked outside at 1:45, just to avoid being late. Jake couldn't believe his eyes. In his whole life, he didn't remember anyone ever dating Ambrosia, and Jackson, one of the most logical and level-headed men he had ever met, wanted to go out with her. The world felt as if it had spun on its axis. Goodbye, Miss Ambrosia, he said with a wave, wanting to get the heck out of Dodge. The woman was scaring him. When they got back to the truck, he looked over at Jackson, who had a glassy-eyed look to him. Have you been drinking this morning? He asked. Jackson shook his head adamantly. Of course not. You know I'm not a big drinker. So, you're going out with Ambrosia tonight. Jake needed a reason for this strange behavior, but he wasn't sure if he was going to get one. Jackson probably had no idea what he'd just done. And every other night I can talk her into it until she agrees to be my wife. Do you know of anyone in town selling a house? It looks like I need to buy one. Jackson had a silly little grin on his face that was truly frightening to Jake. I hope you're happy with her. I'll ask around about a house. Oh, trust me. No one will be happier. Jake finished the tour of the town, showing him different, Quinn-owned businesses. I would try to go to the pub tonight, if she likes that idea, he said when they passed it. Best food in town, and the atmosphere is fun. There's usually a live band playing. Jackson nodded, making a note in his phone. I will ask her if she wants to come here, then. Any other suggestions? Bobling shook his head. It's been a long time since I've been here. There's a steak place in Post Falls, and for a little bigger town, you can head on over to Riston. I'd take her to the pub, though. You could dance there, and that would get her in the mood for some kissing. When she was talking about her flower, did she mean what I think she meant? She's a virgin? Probably, but I have no way of knowing that, sir. No first-hand experience with ambrosia in that way at all. Jackson sighed. I'm sure there are dozens of men in town trying to date her, so I'm going to do my best to make this a perfect date. Any suggestions? Jake grinned. Go to the florist and get her a dozen purple roses. Ambrosia really likes the color purple. I did notice her glasses were purple. I wish I could have seen her beautiful green eyes just a little bit better. When you pick her up, be a gentleman. Open all her doors and basically treat her like she's the most beautiful, wonderful woman you've ever met in your life. She is. Jake was sure his friend was ill, and he thought about saying so, but he was sure his friend would hit him for that, and he didn't need to get in a fight his first day back in Quinn Valley. And if you do want to kiss her at the end of the night, ask her permission first. She's the kind that will gobble that up with a spoon. Oh, and make sure you have that rose quartz heart in your pocket. If you take her advice and act like everything she says is gospel truth, it'll get you far with that one. That's what I'll do, then. Jake, I'll never be able to thank you enough for introducing me to the love of my life. Anytime, Jake said, steering toward the hotel. I'm going to get tacos for lunch. You hungry? Jackson shook his head. I'm too nervous to eat. Jake said nothing, but he couldn't help but wonder how a man who went into battle without a qualm was sitting there shaking because he'd met Ambrosia, of all people. The world was definitely lopsided. Chapter 2. Pulling into the parking lot at the hotel, Jake took Jackson to his car. To him, the man looked just a little bit off. Had Ambrosia put a whammy on him like she'd always claimed her ancestors could do? He shook his head, refusing to say a bad word about the woman to his friend. Jackson was convinced she was just about perfect, and why would Jake try to change his opinion? Jackson got out of the truck, but before he shut the door, he said, I can never thank you enough for vouching for me to Ambrosia. She's going to be the best thing that ever happened to me. I can feel it. Jake grinned. Happy to help. He was sure that his friend was a Moonstruck Marine, and he was glad that it was him. Jake wanted to marry someday, but he liked the idea of waiting a little while. He'd be the fun uncle for a while, before he settled down to have kids of his own. He parked the vehicle near the taco truck that his brother-in-law Siren owned. He hadn't spent any time with the man since they were on the high school football team together and Siren had been dating Roxanne. There had been word that Roxy's heart had been broken by Siren, but Jake had never really understood what happened there. And now they were married and expecting their first child, so he was probably too late to clobber the other man. He got into the line, which was surprisingly long. Siren's tacos were a family favorite, he knew, but it looked like they were a town favorite as well. He'd been waiting a minute or two when someone tapped on his shoulder. Hi, Jake. Jake turned around. Melinda, right? You're the girl who is going to turn the restaurant around and make it healthy, and my 9 a.m. appointment on Monday. Melinda nodded. That's me. Welcome home. He grinned. I'm so happy to be here. I just wish I could explain how different things are when you are drifting around from base to base. It's time to be home. I can understand that completely. And you have such a nice family. Are you back to living with your parents? Just for a week. I'm taking over Riley's house when she marries her pastor next week. I'm catering that wedding. It's my first, and I'm a little nervous. Don't be. Riley and Raina will eat anything. In fact, the last time I saw Riley, I think she was still eating Play-Doh. He shrugged. She laughed. I do believe she's past that point now, though. The wedding is so rushed, and a double wedding. It's just strange to be in charge of it, and they never even came in for a tasting. They told me to serve 2 choices, and they didn't care what they were. I'm sure it will be just great. So, did you see your sergeant? Jake nodded. He saw Earth Mother and had to go in. Would you believe the man took one look at Ambrosia and decided he was in love and wanted to go out with her? They have a date tonight. I've never seen a man lose his cool quite that fast. Ambrosia? You mean the older woman with glasses who tries to tell people's fortunes all the time? Exactly the same. In all the years I've known her, she's never dated anyone. And she made me vouch for him so she could agree. I'm just still a little bit flabbergasted by the whole thing. Melinda nodded. I would be, too. Sounds like you've had a very strange morning. Oh, I have. Trust me. It'll be nice to eat Mom's lasagna tonight. How do you know she's making lasagna? Because I know a secret about my mother. She hates to cook, so she only cooks one thing. Lasagna. If she is the one doing the cooking, and it sounds like she is, I'll be eating a salad, lasagna, and garlic bread. It must be nice to just know those things about yourself, she said. My mom was always unpredictable and trying to find herself. She would flit from one job to another, and then she'd be a stay-at-home mom for a bit, and then she'd take up painting and there would be bowls of fruit all over the house, and those bowls of fruit would be supper after weeks of gourmet meals when she was being the perfect stay-at-home mom. He laughed. Not my mom. She's a redneck witch doctor who is always threatening to write a book, and she makes lasagna. And she loves her children with a ferocity that should be illegal. He shook his head. I don't think I missed her until I just said all that. Thanks for reminding me what an awesome mom I have. Awesome dad, too, but Mom is the heart of us all. Does she ever frown? Melinda asked. From what I can tell, she cries at funerals and when her son is leaving for the Marines. I heard she had a hard time when Dad had his heart problems last summer, but I didn't see that. I'd have come back for it, but surgery was over and he was back at work before I found out. I was in Afghanistan at the time. I'm sure that was hard. He shrugged. You do what you're trained to do and leave it at that. I could have whined about how difficult it was every day, and there were men who did, but I was there of my own accord, and I didn't see a point in being a big baby about it. That makes a lot of sense to me. You do what you have to do. Melinda shrugged. And I'm going to quit stressing about this wedding and do what I have to do. I'm only hurting myself. If they were picky, they'd have specified something rather than leaving it up to me. They sure would have. He nodded to the front of the line. Now tell me what's good here. Everything. Siren doesn't make a bad taco. But what you want is a bag of chips with queso, some tacos, and then finish it off with sapapilla smothered with honey. What's a sapapilla? He asked. Oh, you're having lunch with me in the employee break room today. I have to see you eat your first sapapilla. Are they that good? Melinda just grinned. You'll see. Jake stepped up to the taco truck and grinned at the man inside. Hey, Siren. I told you to keep your grubby hands off my sister, so how'd she get knocked up? Siren grinned. I thought that was over since I married her first. No? I guess. Jake stuck his hand through the window to shake Siren's. Good to see you, man. You too, Bobling. It's been forever. Jake cringed at his old nickname. He'd expected it, but he still hated it. It's Jake now. Oh, I figured you'd go back to Bobling now that you were home. Would you let people call you Bobling? Jake asked, eyebrows raised. Siren chuckled. Not if I could help it. Jake placed his order and nodded to Melinda. This lady told me I had to try sapapillas, so I'm getting her lunch, and we're going to eat some sapapillas. Melinda frowned. No, I'll get my own. Why? I'm already paying. I may as well get yours, too. Siren waited for her order, and then he charged Jake's card. Welcome home. Thank you. I can't wait to be an uncle. I saw Roxy a little bit ago, and she looked perfectly miserable. I almost feel guilty that she's so uncomfortable, but she wanted a baby. And she'll want 4 more. Jake took the food Siren handed him. Thanks, man. I'm sure I'll see you for supper soon. I'm sure you will. Siren smiled and moved on to the next customer, but Jake was happy they'd had a chance to talk, even if only for a short while. The man was married to his sister, after all. Jake followed Melinda into the hotel, to the employee break room, where the two of them snagged a table toward the back. He handed Melinda her tacos and took out his own, but she took a tinfoil-wrapped packet and put it aside. Are those the sopapillas? He asked. She nodded. Yup. Now break out the chips and queso. While they ate, they each talked about different items they wanted to see on the menu of the restaurant. I love the name Impressions, he said. Yeah, well, your dad wants Bob's to stay the name, but it's not happening. That name is awful. Jake nodded. I always hated the name Bob, but Bobling was a million times worse. I can't believe I thought it was normal until I started school and all the other kids picked on me. I threw my first punch over that nickname, and I was still punching over it in high school. He shook his head. Someone should pay for saddling me with something so awful. Who came up with that nickname anyway? My grandpa, and I love him, so I can't even complain. He shook his head. Of course, his name is Harley Quinn, so he has a doozy of a name, too. I guess he wanted one of his grandkids to be saddled with something horrific as well. Melinda ate the first bite of her taco, and it was all she could do to keep from moaning aloud. When she ate Siren's tacos alone, she did typically moan. It was ridiculous. These soft chicken tacos make my heart beat faster. If Siren wasn't a married man, I'd throw myself at his feet, just so he'd make me tacos every day. Jake laughed. Well, if he wasn't my brother-in-law, I could get behind that idea. But he is, so let's be kind to my very pregnant sister and avoid doing that. He looked at her for a moment. You're not serious about anyone? She had no ring on her finger, but that didn't mean anything. She could keep it in her pocket during work hours. Melinda looked surprised by the question, but she shook her head. Nope. I've been married to the job. There were 2 sous chefs working under Michael, and I wanted to be the one promoted to take his place when he finally retired. Looks like you made that happen. Now you get a little more free time? I sure hope so. We'll see. She shrugged. Kaz would be thrilled to see more of me, I'm sure. Kaz? He asked. My cat. As a kitten, he had a very kamikaze-like attitude about life, so I named him Kaz. I call him Wee Beastie a lot, too. Pretty much whatever comes out of my mouth is what I call him. He grinned. Wow, you're a crazy cat lady. Crazy, I'll go with. Cat is fine. But lady? I'm not so sure about that one. Oh, I see. I know you weren't raised in the valley, or I'd know you, so where are you from? Kemmer, Wyoming. Lived there until I went to culinary school in Park City, Utah, and then I came here. I really do love the people in this town. It's a special place. My sergeant told me that he expected unicorns, double rainbows at all times, and leprechauns throwing luck at people. And instead, he found a crazy woman who believes that fairies live in crystals. Lovely. Melinda grinned even as she shook her head. I've known her my entire life, and I've never been able to figure her out. She's something else. I can't believe he saw something in her no one else did. She tilted her head to one side, thinking about it. You know, that's what love is. Seeing something in someone else that no one else does. I hope it works out for them, because even crazy people deserve love. He finished his last taco and threw the tinfoil square it had been wrapped in into the bag. Now for these amazing sapapilla things. Nope. You have to wait until I'm done with my tacos. Her eyes twinkled with laughter, and he felt his stomach clench. Oh, do I? He reached across the table, quickly to snatch the sapapillas, but was stopped by his terrible nickname being screamed. Bobling. It was his sister Raina, wearing pink scrubs, which was her work uniform. She flew across the room at him. You're home early. He got up and put his arms around her, lifting her off her feet. You grew up while I was gone. Well, you were gone forever. He laughed. I guess I was. Good to see you, sis. I'm glad you're home in time for my wedding. I can't wait for you to meet Derek. He works with Joel, and he's just amazing. Jake grinned at her. She had told him all of that in the emails she'd sent to him weekly. He felt like he already knew Derek after reading so much about him. I'm glad he makes you happy. He does. He really does. Raina peeked over at Melinda. When did you get back? Just this morning. I flew into Boise last night, and I spent the night, but I woke up about 4 and just wanted to be home. So, I drove on here. Well, I'm glad you did. It's so good to see you. She hugged him once more, and then hurried from the room. Jake looked over at Melinda, who was grinning. What? Bobling. Everyone in this entire town calls you Bobling. It's going to be an uphill battle to convince anyone that you're really Jake. He sighed, sitting back down. I know. I'm going to fight for it, though. I'm thinking about buying a pack of "Hello, my name is" stickers and wearing them everywhere. Not sure what good it would do me, but I might try it. She laughed. I don't think it would do any good at all, but I guess if it made you happy. He shrugged. I'm happy already. It's just good to be home. And I cannot wait to start working later. After lunch, I'm going to go up and check out the workout center. It's going to be good to have a job I can sink my teeth into. Very few people get to do what they love. I'm happy to say, I'm one of those few, and I think you will be, too. That will make us some of the happiest people around. Melinda reached for the sapapillas and opened them, carefully spreading butter and honey on one of them, and then handing it to him. Eat. He looked at the thing curiously before he took a big bite out of it. He closed his eyes with pleasure. These need to be served at my sister's wedding. Can you make these? She shook her head. No, but rumor has it Siren is going to provide some. Oh, good. Do I get a family discount on Siren stuff? Because if not, I might go broke. He shook his head. I must seem like a hypocrite to you. I talked this morning about having a healthy menu at the restaurant, and here I am eating this fried bready thing with butter and honey. But oh, it's good. She shrugged. You'll work it off later, I'm sure. You seem the type. I am definitely the type. He reached for another and fixed it just the way she had. You'd better eat yours, or I'm going to pig out on them, too. She laughed. I only want one, and we got 4. I can't eat 2 in front of my personal trainer. He might say something. Jake shook his head. No way. You seem to be in good shape. No extra weight. Now we just need to redistribute that weight, and you'll be on your way. As soon as the words were out of his mouth, he realized he shouldn't have said them. You're gorgeous the way you are, but if you want help conditioning, I'm happy to do that. Melinda shook her head at him. No one can call you a sweet talker, Bobling Jake Quinn. You're not anything like Dusty, are you? My cousin Dusty? You know him? Every woman in town knows him. He considers himself a real ladies' man. I went out with him once, and I realized he was not the right man for me. Jake shrugged. I haven't seen him in years. I'm sure I'll be making the round of the Quinns this week, though. Everyone wants to see me, which is good and bad. I mean, I'm glad everyone is happy that I'm home, but home has always been my place to relax, not be surrounded by people. That makes sense to me. I might take off on a four-wheeler and head up into the mountains for a night or two. Not this weekend, not next. And I guess the next is a family get-together to welcome me home. He sighed. I'll do it sometime soon. I swear. Melinda shook her head. Your busy schedule won't last forever. Are you kidding me? So many Quinns are getting married this year, they're having to double up on dates. He ran his fingers through his hair. I'll find my peace and quiet eventually. Yeah, you will. She got up and threw her trash in the receptacle provided. I'll help you out by leaving you alone now and getting back to work. I have a menu to overhaul and food to prepare for a big wedding next weekend. Thanks for lunch. Thanks for teaching me about sapopillas. Remember when I am rolling down the street because I'm too big to walk that you brought about my downfall. She just laughed as she left the room. Jake stared at the door after she'd closed it. That Melinda was something special. Chapter 3. As Melinda walked back to the restaurant, she had a new spring in her step. She had wondered a lot about Bobling, and now that she had met him as Jake, she knew she wanted to get to know him better. He was the only one of the 5 children of Bob and April Lynn Quinn who had moved away after high school, so she found him fascinating. The Quinns all seemed so tight-knit to her, and she wished her family was the same, but they never really had been. The Chases of Kemmerer just had never been like that. When she walked into the kitchen of the restaurant, her sous chef was working on a burger. He gave her a strange look. Have a good lunch? It was really nice, thanks. She walked closer. Everything under control? I want to sit down and work on the new menu. I can't believe you got Bob to agree to change the name of this place and make it nicer. It's going to be great cooking real food for a change. And yeah, it's all under control. You get to work on that new menu, so we can change faster. Nathan had been hired shortly after she was, and she had always felt in competition with him, but he didn't seem to begrudge her the promotion. He'd been nothing but supportive, which thrilled her. All right. Come and get me if you need me. She walked into the tiny office that she shared with the restaurant manager and sat down to work on the menu. She Googled a few recipes for vegetarians and started making a list of dishes she'd like to try. After talking to the restaurant manager, of course, but they were on the same page on all of this. He wanted Impressions to be the most sought-out restaurant in town as well. Melinda believed that together, they could make it happen. Asterisk. Jake took the stairs to the top floor, hoping some of those sapopillas would be worked off before he got there. When he pushed open the door to the workout center, he frowned. No one was there, and some of the equipment looked as if it had been neglected. He carefully walked around, assessing the damage. He stopped at a treadmill that looked as if it had been through an earthquake and pushed the button to turn it on. When nothing happened, he walked over to check if it was plugged in, and it was. He shook his head. He found a paper and pen on the desk in the little office there, though apparently no one worked in it, and started making a list of things that needed to be replaced, updated, or fixed. He desperately hoped his father was feeling generous, because he was going to need a hefty budget to get the place to the point people would want to work out there again. As soon as he was done, he went back down the stairs to the first floor and his father's office. This time Bob was alone, and he walked in without knocking. Bob looked up, and he grinned. You have no idea how much I love it that I can look up and see you in front of me. Jake grinned. You may not feel that way after I tell you why I'm here. You want to spend some of my money on that gym. Okay, how much? After sitting down, Jake read over his list aloud. I think it's all going to be in the neighborhood of 10,000. There are no working treadmills, only one working bike, and one working elliptical. That's ridiculous for a hotel this size. And I need exercise balls and free weights. There are no free weights up there. How am I supposed to train people? Bob sighed. Order it. And we haven't talked about your salary yet. I'm getting a salary? Jake asked, surprised. I thought I'd just be getting my own clients. No, because I want you to make sure everything is in working order and be there for people who ask for help. This is going to be done right or not done at all. Well, then let's talk salary. Jake was happy to accept it, and it sounded like he'd be doing a lot more than personal training. After a quick negotiation, they settled on a salary they were both pleased with. Bob pulled out a credit card and handed it to his son. Don't go nuts now, Bobling. That's for business expenses only. Jake happily took it, biting back his correction of his name. Thanks. I'll order everything today. Hopefully, we can have it up and running properly within a week or two. That would be great. The sooner the better. I want to put on our website that we have a first-class workout facility with a personal trainer. Hopefully that will bring more people in. Thanks, Dad. I'm assuming the office is mine? Yup. All yours. I'll need a computer. That doable? Order it. You have a credit card in your hand. Bob looked down. Now let me get back to the real work. Jake laughed as he got up and left, going back up the stairs. He sat down at the desk in the little office and started ordering the things he needed with his phone and his father's credit card. He was going to make the gym the best in the valley, and then he was going to be the best personal trainer in all of Idaho. After finishing the orders, Jake took his father's credit card back to him. No, keep it. You get a credit card for the gym, and that's it. Order what you need, but don't go crazy. Thanks, Dad. See you at home later. He hated that he would be living at home, even for the less than 2 weeks until the wedding. He'd been on his own for too long for that to sit comfortably. Walking out to the truck, he thought about how good it was going to feel when he was in Riley's little house. At least he'd heard it was little. He should probably get her to show it to him before he actually moved in. It was a rental, and he figured his father probably owned it. He owned a lot of property around Quinn Valley, and he loved renting to his children. Instead of heading home, Jake knew he needed to stop in and see someone first. He drove straight out to the ranch where his grandparents lived, his tires spitting gravel as he drove up to the house, and went to the door. It would be good to get out of his uniform, but first, his grandma Gertie needed to see him in it. He didn't bother to knock, because it was frowned upon at his grandparents' house, and he went straight in. He found her in the kitchen, sitting with a friend. Grandma? He said, alerting her to his presence. When the matriarch of the Quinn family turned and saw him standing there in his uniform, he knew keeping it on all day had been worth it. She covered her mouth with her hand, and tears sprang into her eyes. Bobling? Are you really home? She jumped up and ran to him, wrapping both arms tightly around him. Jake buried his face in her hair, which smelled of chocolate chip cookies. She'd been baking, and he was going to get himself some of those cookies, no matter what it took. I missed you so much. Not as much as I missed you, boy. Not nearly as much. I prayed for your safe return at least a dozen times a day, every day. You're home for good now? She looked up at him, her eyes pleading. I just negotiated a salary with Dad for being the gym manager and personal trainer at the hotel gym. How's that for being home? He asked with a grin. That sounds good and home to me. She stepped back and studied him. You're more muscular, but thinner. Didn't they feed you well in the Marines? Sit down, And I'll get you some freshly baked chocolate chip cookies. Coffee or milk? He smiled, thinking of all the times he'd had cookies and milk at this very table. Milk. I couldn't drink coffee with my cookies at your house. It wouldn't be right. He moved to the table and sat down, smiling at the woman there. You're Siren's grandmother, aren't you? She nodded. Welcome home, Bobling. The whole town has been excited for your triumphant return. Triumphant? Huh. Everyone calls me Jake now. But it's wonderful to be home. The older woman laughed, even as his grandmother slipped the cookies in front of him. Good luck getting people to really call you that. She slowly stood up. I'm going to go now, Gertie. You need time with this special boy of yours. Grandma just smiled at Jake, nodding. We'll catch up later. When we're fighting over holding our great-grandson. Siren's grandmother went to the door and let herself out. She obviously understood that Grandma needed time alone with Jake. I don't remember her name, Grandma. I didn't know what to call her. Doesn't matter now, does it? She left. Grandma sat down near him to watch him eat the milk and cookies. He couldn't remember how many times they'd sat in her kitchen, just like this. How was your trip home? Did anyone bother you? No, it was good. I flew into Boise and drove home this morning. Well, that's good. Everyone is all abuzz about Raina and Riley's wedding. Have you met their future husbands yet? She asked. Jake shook his head. I think I'll meet them tonight. Dad's calling for a family dinner. And I'll have a welcome home party for you 2 weeks from Saturday. I'd do it a week from Saturday, but we all know your sisters are getting married. And I have a feeling you're going to be too busy resting this Saturday. You know, the idea of sleeping and waking up when I want to is pretty amazing at the moment. I feel like all I've done is live by someone else's clock for the past 12 years. Jake smiled. I love the idea of having at least weekends with no alarm clock and know where I need to be. Think I can handle it? I think you can handle anything, Bobling. Jake took a deep breath. I go by Jake now, Grandma. I've outgrown Bobling. Grandma shook her head at him. Of course you haven't. You'll always be Bobling to me. I really don't want to be called that anymore. Are you sure I can't convince you that Jake suits me better? You can try, she grinned. I'll try. I won't like it, but I'll try. That's all I ask. Jake shoved the last cookie into his mouth and washed it down with milk. I'm going to head home and start on my laundry. Lots to do. Grandma nodded. I know, but I'm so glad you came to see me. I wasn't expecting you to be standing there. She dashed another tear away. Please don't ever leave the valley for a long time again. My old heart can't take it. He hugged her tightly. I won't. I promise. He headed for the front door, feeling like he'd needed that bit of time with his grandmother more than he'd ever needed anything. She had always been a positive driving force in his life, and he'd stayed with her every time a new sister was born. Nothing came more naturally than loving her. He drove through the busy streets of the usually quiet little town. Tourist season was in full swing there in Quinn Valley, and it made him want to go swimming, eat ice cream, and ride four-wheelers up into the mountains. He smiled as he realized he could do all those things. It didn't have to be shoved into a 3-day weekend. No, the rest of his life could be about doing the things he wanted to do. He'd loved being a Marine. He'd been good at it. But it had made him appreciate life outside of the military even more. All of the fun things he enjoyed could easily be done now that he was out. When he drove into his parents' driveway, he was surprised by the sense of nostalgia that overwhelmed him. He'd been very excited to be at his grandma's, but it hadn't been home. Walking into the house, he wandered through, touching everything he had missed, eyeing the new large-screen television that his mother had once claimed would never grace the house. His parents' room looked just the same to him, but his sisters' rooms were all empty. They were all on their own, which made him sad. He hadn't been there to see them grow up. He'd done something good, for himself and his country, but what about the things he'd missed? Then he went into his own bedroom and felt as if he'd been transported back in time. His whole world had once been encapsulated in this room, and now, it felt so odd. It had been left alone, because his mother knew he would return someday. There were posters of his favorite bands on the walls and football trophies on the furniture. It had been well dusted, but that was all. It was waiting for him, ready to welcome him with open arms, just as his grandmother had. This room, this house, he was home. Finally home. He sat on the edge of his bed for a moment and smiled. It was perfect. After a minute or two of reminiscing, he went to the car to get his things. He had laundry that desperately needed doing, and he wanted a shower. He'd put another dress uniform on, because he knew his mother would like that, but today was the last day he'd be wearing a Marine uniform. It was time for him to return to the life that felt both like it had stood still waiting for him and raced by without him. Asterisk. Jake was sitting in the living room of the house, a can of Coke at his side, and watching baseball when he heard the door open. There stood his mother, staring at him with tears running down her face. He got to his feet and walked to her, afraid to reach out and try to touch her, for fear she'd disappear. "Mom." April Lynn Quinn burst into sobs and grabbed him around the waist, pulling him to her. "Bobling. I just can't believe you're finally home." He didn't need to correct the name. He'd do that later. For now, he needed to bask in the glow of her smile. The smile that lit up the entire valley, no matter what time of day or year. "I missed you so much." "Don't leave again," she said, stepping back and brushing away her tears. "Come into the kitchen with me, while I make the lasagna for supper. Dad called a family dinner, and you know as well as I do, I can't cook anything else." He sat at the table while he watched her putter around the kitchen, making her famous lasagna. He couldn't wait for the first bite. That stuff was famous for a reason. "Who all will be here?" he asked. "Just immediate family. Roxy and Siren, Renee and Chad, Raina and Derek, Riley and Blake. You, me, and your dad. Have you met any of the men yet?" He shook his head. "I ran into Roxy and Raina at the hotel, but I haven't seen Renee or Riley yet. I got tacos for lunch, so I saw Siren, but I've known him my whole life, so that wasn't like it was new for me." "Roxy's huge, isn't she?" April Lynn smiled. "I cannot believe I'm going to be a grandmother. All 4 of my girls will be married in another 10 days. She looked at Jake curiously. "And my boy? Are you seeing anyone?" His mind briefly flashed to Melinda, but he shook his head. "Nope. No one. I've kind of been busy working instead of looking for a girlfriend." "Good for you. Now you can start looking for a girlfriend. I can find you someone if you'd like, but I have a feeling that would just upset you." "When are you going to start working at the hotel?" she asked. Jake ignored her offer to find him a girlfriend. That was the last thing he needed from his mother. "I guess I did that today when I walked through that broken-down gym and ordered new stuff for it. There's so much I want to change in there." "Good," she said. "You need to make it yours." She looked at him for a moment, just staring. "I'm so glad you're home. I'll probably say that a dozen times today, but I'll mean it more each time. Welcome home, Bobling." Jake smiled, feeling loved. He knew he was. Even in Afghanistan and during his tour in Iraq, he could feel the love from his mother across the miles. No one had as much capacity for love as April Lynn. No one. "Thanks, Mom. You have no idea how good it is to see your smile. I think that's the one thing I clung to, no matter the circumstances. My mama's smile was waiting for me back home. Her smile will be coming through tears as she gets used to you being home. She paused for a moment, as if trying to find the right words. I'm so proud of you for your service, but I'm so thankful that God brought you home to me, whole and hearty. She brushed away the tears she'd just mentioned would be coming. I love you, Bobling. I love you, too, Mom. Chapter 4. Around 6, all of Jake's sisters and their men started pouring into the room. The first to come in was Riley, and she was holding the hand of a smiling man. It's so nice to meet you, Jake. I've heard wonderful things about you. Riley smiled at Jake, hugging him tight. Jake, this is my Blake. Rhyming names are fun. Jake laughed. So, you're the new pastor in town, huh? Sure am. Very good to meet you. I'm excited for your wedding. Jake shook his head. Though it is hard to believe that the little girl who used to sneak all of my Easter candy is old enough to get married. Riley stuck her tongue out at him. You're supposed to only talk about my good qualities. If Blake finds out the truth before the wedding, he won't marry me. Blake laughed, shaking his head. Nothing is going to stop me now. Renee came in with Chad next. Bobling, do you remember Chad? Jake nodded. Sure. Your friend's big brother. Yup. He was in the army for a lot of years, and as soon as he was back in town, I fell at his feet. Not even a little bit surprising, Renee. Jake reached out and grabbed his sister in a hug. Very good to see you again, Chad. I always hoped Renee would find a good guy to make her happy. I have, Renee said. Being married to Chad makes me happier than I ever dreamed I could be. She studied her big brother for a moment. You look really tired. Will you let me zone you later? I think you need it. Jake shrugged. I've actually never been zoned, but I'd be happy to let you do it if it's anything like a foot rub. Renee rolled her eyes, looking over at April Lynn, who hadn't quit smiling since the moment she got home to see Jake sitting on her couch. I need to borrow some oils, Mom. No problem. I have the entire Butterfly Express collection in my room. Thanks. Jake shrugged at Chad, who grinned. Glad you made it home safe, Chad said. You too, man. The door opened, and Roxy came in, looking even bigger than she had that morning. Are you sure that's not twins? Jake asked. Roxy hugged him as she laughed. I have been assured it's only one. Thank God. I cannot imagine being able to keep up with two newborns and working at the same time. You could quit, Siren said softly. No, she couldn't. April Lynn said from the kitchen. Bite your tongue. Siren sighed. I hear that from all of them, but she looks so tired. His eyes met Jake's, and he seemed truly worried. Jake immediately lost all apprehension about Siren. The love the other man felt for his sister was obvious, and that's all he cared about. Are there problems with the pregnancy? Jake asked, his eyes going to his eldest sister. Not at all. I'm just worried. I guess it's part of having a wife who is 10.5 months pregnant with triplets. Roxy shook her head. I'm standing right here. Stop talking about me. I'm sitting in the best chair in the house. She walked over to Renee, who got up immediately, and sank down into their father's recliner, immediately putting her feet up. Thanks, Renee. You win Best Sister of the Day. Renee shrugged. I'm just competitive enough to be happy about that. The door opened, and this time Bob walked in, followed by Melinda. I figured I'd grab a random chef from the hotel to make the numbers even. Jake narrowed his eyes at his father, knowing there was nothing at all random about Melinda being there. Hi, he said softly to Melinda. Sorry you got dragged here. Why sorry? She asked. I'm dying to try your mom's lasagna. At least there will be 3 people here calling me Jake. 3? Who else is on Team Jake? She asked. Riley and Blake. I wanted to kiss their feet when they called me Jake without having to be reminded. Jake shook his head. I'm seriously ready to scream at the next person who calls me Bobling. Melinda grinned. Hold it in. We'll train them. Her use of the word we both startled and pleased him. He liked thinking of her working with him to accomplish something. I sure hope so, because I don't know how much longer I can stand it. Did you ever complain about that name when you lived here before? She asked. He shook his head. I figured I'd go to the military and reinvent myself, and I did, but now I'm home and no one is getting it. The door opened again, and he looked over to see Raina standing with a man he'd never met. His sister hurried to him and threw her arms around him. Hi, big brother. It's nice to hug you. Jake laughed. It's nice to be hugged. Raina stepped back and held her hand out for a man. Bobling, this is Derek. Derek, my brother, Bobling. Jake said automatically. I go by Jake now. It's good to meet you, Derek. I hear you work with Joel at his hospital. I do. Best move I ever made. Derek smiled. I told her you'd be going by Jake when you got home, but she didn't believe me. I'd be thrilled if you started referring to me as Jake to remind her. I will do my very best. Derek looked at Melinda. How's Kaz? Melinda smiled. The best vets look at your face and remember your pet's name, even if they don't remember yours. He's doing great. Still a bit of a monster, but I love him. He's a sweet one. When he's not pouncing on me and standing on my face in the mornings, so I'll get up and feed him. Derek laughed. We're all happy when someone is willing to adopt one found on the side of the road that way. Thanks for being that someone. I wouldn't give him up for anything. Jake felt a little funny knowing Melinda had been brought to supper to be his partner, or whatever his father had been thinking, but he did want to get to know her better. Watching her interact with others intrigued him even more than he had been. When they went into supper, Bob prayed over the meal, thanking God for returning his son home safely. After the amens, they all served themselves generous portions of the lasagna. Melinda looked over at April Lynn. I have heard such good things about your lasagna. If it's half as good as everyone says, I'm going to need you to teach me to make it. It might be good on the new menu. April Lynn nodded, but then frowned. New menu? Melinda nodded. Yes. Now that I'm in charge of one of the restaurants, I'm going to change the name to Impressions and try to make it a go-to for dates in our little town. The pub is fun, but if you want a quiet, elegant meal, you can eat at Impressions. April Lynn smiled. That sounds amazing. When will it be done? I am working up the new menu now. I just got the go-ahead this morning, and Jake put in some suggestions that I'm sure I'll do my best to implement. That sounds wonderful, Roxy said. I know where you're taking me for our first date night after the baby is born. She looked at Siren. Sounds good to me. If only we could find someone who would want to take care of the baby while we went out. Siren shook his head, as if he was utterly baffled. April Lynn laughed. That's my job, she said. You bring me that baby anytime, day or night, and I will pull up my big girl panties and act like a grandma. They all laughed, knowing April Lynn was dying to get her hands on her first grandbaby. This past month has felt like 6, Roxy said. How did you make it through the last months, Mom? I timed my pregnancies to be over in the winter. It's the only way to survive. And you should have Raina give you a massage. It'll help a lot. I'd like to, Roxy said, but she's always so booked. Riley grinned. That's where your baby sister comes in. I learned prenatal massage last week, and I'm required to find someone to practice on. How does your Saturday look? She asked. Roxy's eyes widened. I forgot you were doing massage school. My Saturday only has one thing on it. Massage by Riley. Siren smiled. Thanks, Riley. You're a lifesaver. I'm sure it wouldn't be nearly as good as one of Raina's massages, but I'm getting there. Raina shook her head at Roxy. You know I'd drop everything to massage you. You just have to ask. And I'm supposed to ask right before your wedding, when I know you have a million things you need to be doing? Roxy shook her head. Not happening. Raina sighed. I'm busy, but if you're hurting, then I will do whatever it takes to help you. Don't forget to get a zone, too, Renee said. I can help with some of the emotional trauma that goes with being pregnant. I'm not sure I'd call it trauma, April Lynn said with a laugh. All in all, it was a good meal, and when they were near the end, Jake decided he had to say what needed to be said then. Thanks for coming and welcoming me back, everyone. I'm glad to finally be here again. He took a deep breath. I do want you all to know that I no longer respond to the name Bobling. I only answer to Jake. April Lynn shrugged as expected. I'll do my best to make you happy, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to remember. I'd appreciate it if you'd try. Bob frowned at him. But, what about power to the Bobs? You believe in Bob power all you want, Dad. I'm going to stick with Jake. The others all shrugged, obviously having known it was coming. Blake nodded. I told Riley she needed to learn to call you Jake before you came back, because that nickname is so awful. Riley nodded. I'm not perfect at it, but I get it right 80% of the time. We all need to work toward calling you by an adult name and not Bobling. Jake nodded emphatically. Thanks, Riley. And thank you, Blake. I appreciate you trying to teach her. Not a problem at all. I can just imagine being saddled with a nickname like that. It would make me crazy. I changed it as soon as I left town, but it seems to still be haunting me. Jake shrugged. We'll all work on it. We will, April Lynn said. Just don't hate us when we slip up. I won't. Jake was just glad they were willing to try. It was honestly better than he'd expected. Can I do the dishes for you, April Lynn? Melinda asked. No, thank you. You're a guest. Besides, my girls and I have done so many loads of dishes together, we know how to avoid each other walking back and forth to the sink. April Lynn got to her feet and started clearing the table, and all four of her daughters automatically got up to help. She held up a hand when Roxy stood up. You sit your butt down in the living room. There is no need for you to be doing dishes in your condition. Roxy nodded, looking grateful for the reprieve and wandering out to the living room to sit in the recliner there. Jake followed her, knowing his mother would shoo him out of the kitchen. Melinda stood looking awkward. I really need to get home, but I'm having a lovely time. Bob got to his feet. I'll drive you. I don't want you walking alone at night. It's not even dark. I'll be fine. Jake jumped to his feet. You didn't bring your car? No, I rarely drive unless I'm going out of town or in need of groceries. I prefer to walk everywhere. It doesn't hurt me one little bit. Melinda shrugged. Walking had become a way of life for her years before, and she liked it. Well, let me drive you home, then. No need for you to get out, Dad. He opened the door and waited for her to precede him. As they walked to his truck, he asked for her address, and surprisingly after so long, he immediately knew where her house was. I really enjoyed lunch today. It was fun to hang out with just you. Melinda nodded, smiling at him. I thought so, too. Today's been a good day for me. For me, too. It's so good to be home. I'll probably say that 1,000 times in the next month, before I get used to being here again. Would you be willing to do something for me? She asked, wanting to see him again, but not wanting it to seem like she was asking him out. What's that? Would you go to supper at the restaurant tomorrow and let me have you try out a few dishes for the reception and you tell me which ones you like best? He shrugged. I'd be happy to. I'm always willing to eat. She laughed. If you want, bring your friend, unless he's out with Ambrosia again. Do you think he'll be done with her after tonight? I didn't think he'd ever look at her twice to begin with, so I'm not sure what's going to happen there, but I'll ask him. I'm sure we can provide good feedback, and if he can't come, I'll bring one of the plethora of cousins I have hanging around with their fingers up their noses. You do have a lot of cousins. 20. On one side of the family. Thankfully, Mom was an only child. Imagine what it would be like if she'd come from a family as big as Dad's. He shook his head. What time tomorrow? He wanted to get into the gym and work on fixing up the equipment he could. Come at supper time. Around 6 or so? She shrugged. I'll be there all night, and I'll start those meals first thing, so they'll be ready when you get there. Sounds good to me. I'll see if I can pry Jackson away from Ambrosia and her flower. Her flower? Melinda asked, confused. Probably not the best topic to bring up, so pretend I didn't. He pulled into her driveway and waited as she got out. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye, she called as she hurried toward the house. Jake watched her go before slowly driving back home. She was special, and his dad obviously liked the two of them together. He never would have pegged his dad for someone who would try and set him up with someone, but obviously he'd been wrong. When he got back to this parent's house, he went inside to find all of his siblings still there, looking at him expectantly when he walked in. Are you waiting for me to do a little song and dance? He asked. I'm waiting to know if you kissed her, Riley said. Jake shook his head. No, I didn't kiss her. I just met her this morning. She seems nice, but I could never kiss a virtual stranger, he said. He put his hand over his mouth to act shocked at the idea. Sure, Bobling, April Lynn said. Even I'm not buying that one. The laughter that followed her statement felt good and healthy. He moved to sit on an arm of the couch, because all of the furniture was full. Thanks for cooking tonight, Mom. You have no idea what it means to me. Probably about 1/1,000,000th of what having you home means to me. Do you have to move out after Riley marries? Jake nodded emphatically. I'm 32, and I've been on my own for a very long time. I need to move out. She sighed. Well, try not to sound so happy about it, would you? Jake laughed. I'm going to live 3 streets over. I'll be here all the time, begging you to make lasagna for me. I'll fix you cold cereal or a sandwich whenever you're hungry. Riley leaned forward, looking at her mother. I think this would be a good time to learn to cook a new meal and make it as good as your lasagna. How about enchiladas? How about Siren just brings tacos, and we forget I've ever even thought of making anything other than lasagna? April Lynn returned. Roxy's jaw dropped. You mean you've thought of making things other than lasagna? Not on purpose. Subject closed. With her usual sweet smile, none of them could argue with April Lynn. If she wanted to spend the rest of her life only making lasagna, then that's obviously what she'd do. Roxy shrugged at Riley. We did try. But now that subject's closed, so we probably should stop talking about it, Riley said, shaking her head. Do we know how to stop talking about something? Don't we usually beat everything into the ground and stomp all over it? Yes, that's what we're good at, Renee said with a grin. Maybe we should try to be good at other things, Raina asked. Why would you do that when you're already so good at everything? Derek asked with a grin. I raised a house full of smart-mouthed girls. Where did I go wrong? April Lynn asked no one in particular. You led by example, dear, Bob said, grinning at her. Chapter 5. All day Friday, Jake worked in the gym, trying to get everything he wanted accomplished. He was able to jury-rig a couple of the machines, so he would at least have a couple of things people could do when they came to the gym. He was annoyed that it had been allowed to degenerate as far as it had, though. It should have been kept in the condition it was in when his father had first purchased the hotel. He cleaned all morning and again went to the taco truck for lunch. This time he ran into an old high school friend, and they talked about the years. "I married Stephanie. I think she said you two went out once or twice in school," Alex said. "Oh, yeah. Maybe once." Jake shook his head. "I hardly feel like we're old enough to marry." Alex laughed heartily. "We have 3 kids. You'd better get a move on, Bobling. All the pretty girls are going to be gone." Jake wasn't sure what to say to Alex's comment, so he said, "I go by Jake now." "Jake?" Alex shrugged. "I'll try to remember. I always wondered when you ditch Bobling. Awful name." "Yup. And I've been done with it since I joined the military." "Good for you." Jake got up to the truck and placed his order, relieved that he didn't have to try to make conversation anymore. He felt very distanced from Alex and his family. He was still single and would be for a long time. Maybe. He ordered tacos, sopapillas, and chips and queso. He nodded at Alex as he walked back toward the hotel, spotting Melinda waiting in line. "I got the sopapillas and chips and queso," he said softly. She grinned. "I'll join you as soon as I get my tacos." He went to the break room and sat down with his food. It was hard to remember to open the tacos and chips and queso first, because he could already taste the sopapillas. Melinda joined him a short while later. "How's the gym coming along?" He groaned. "It's in such bad shape. Why has no one taken care of it?" She shrugged. "Because you weren't there to do it, I guess." "Well, I'm back now, and it's going to be done right. Do you have any idea who I talked to about getting the gym on the list to be cleaned daily like everything else? And why isn't it already on the list?" "I have no idea. Go talk to your dad, though, and he'll take care of it." "Doesn't he have an assistant manager?" Jake asked. "I feel like I'm going to the CEO all the time for new pens." She laughed. "He is your father, but you could go to Rachel, too. She's amazing to work with." "I'll talk to her, then, if I can find her. Her office is to the right of your dad's." "Easy as pie." "All right. I'll talk to Rachel after lunch." He dipped a chip into the queso. "I ordered a crap ton of equipment yesterday, and it should be here by Tuesday morning. Let's put off me training you until I have everything like I want it. I mean, we can meet somewhere else and train, but it would be different." "I can wait. I need to be concentrating on getting ready for the wedding anyway. I'm just glad they didn't ask me to do the cake. I'm a chef, but I'm not much of a baker." "You still want Jackson and me to come by tonight, right?" "I haven't called him." "If you can." Melinda shrugged. Jake picked up his phone and sent a quick text to Jackson. "Dinner tonight?" "Can't. I need to practice. I have a mariachi band set up so I can serenade Ambrosia at 8. "Why?" "Because I can. And I'm proposing soon. I'm done playing cat and mouse. You met her yesterday. When she took my hand to read my palm at dinner last night, I was done for." Jake shook his head at Melinda. Jackson had really and truly lost his mind. "I hope she says yes. I won't take no for an answer." "Oh, gotta go. She must have gotten my 6 dozen roses, because she's pounding on my door. He can't come to dinner with me because he has a mariachi band scheduled to serenade Ambrosia at 8 and he needs to practice." Melinda choked on the bite of taco in her mouth. She swallowed it down with a big swig of water and looked at him with wide eyes. Why? I asked him that. He said it's because he can. And he had to go, because she was at his door. He said she must have gotten his 6 dozen roses. And he's going to propose, because he's done playing cat and mouse. He met her yesterday. She started shaking with laughter. Now that's a whirlwind romance, all right. Sure. Mind if I just come alone tonight? Jake wasn't sure he would be able to look at the other man without laughing anytime soon anyway. Not at all. Or grab a cousin. I don't care either way. Jake nodded. I think I'll bring Dusty. Okay, but it's your fault if he gets all flirty. That man would flirt with a tree stump. It was Jake's turn to choke. He would? Oh, yeah. He's crazy through and through. I guess I'm seeing a new side of lots of people this week. Jackson, Dusty. We'll see what I think after the night is over. He picked up his phone and texted Dusty. Dinner tonight? Sure, where? Glad you're back in town. At the hotel. Bob's whatever it's called. I know the place. I'll meet you there. Time? 6. He didn't bother to say they'd be testing food for the wedding. If he remembered anything about Dusty, it was that he never stopped eating. Of course, they'd both been a lot younger and hungrier back then. Dusty's a go. Sounds good. I'll probably make small portions of 6 different things for you to try. I just want to know which the 2 best are so I can make them for the wedding. Melinda smiled at him. Bring your appetite. I won't eat between now and then, well, only if I get hangry, and then I'll have an apple and not a meal. Is it strange to be home? Jake smiled. So strange. I have time that I can decide what to do with. It's pretty amazing. You had some free time in the military, didn't you? Sure. But it wasn't free time at home in my town with my family. Don't get me wrong. I enjoyed being a soldier, but I was ready to be home. He leaned across the table toward her. Want to know a secret? Sure. I didn't shave today for the first time in years. I think I'm going to grow a beard. By the time I was old enough to grow one, I wasn't allowed because of the Marines' grooming rules. Now I can have one if I want. She grinned. I think you'd look good in a beard. She wadded up the last of her trash and tossed it into the garbage can. I need to get back. The sous chef working today was hired to replace me, and he needs a lot of hand-holding. Jake knew she was speaking figuratively, but he still got a pang when she mentioned holding another man's hand. That had never happened to him before. Okay, I'll see you later. Sounds good. After she was gone, he thought a bit about how he was feeling for her and was surprised that he was looking for ways to spend time with her. Maybe he was acting as crazy as Jackson was. Then he realized no one was acting as crazy as Jackson. Asterisk. While preparing for the taste test that afternoon, Melinda couldn't quit thinking about Jake. She didn't know what it was about him. She wasn't especially attracted to men in uniform, so that couldn't be it. There was just something special about him, and she wanted more time with him. Always more. The new sous chef, John, was fresh out of culinary school, and he was slow and methodical about everything he did. She appreciated the job he was doing, but he needed to do it faster, especially if they were going to be transitioning to the menu she was preparing. She watched him chop up some chives for a baked potato, each cut perfect and precise. Can I show you something? She asked. He nodded. Am I doing it wrong? This is how I was taught. I know. I was taught the same way, but if you hold the onions more loosely, you can cut them faster. We're not worried about having all the pieces be perfect and precise. What matters is doing it efficiently. I'll work on that. He did as she suggested and nodded. It is a lot faster. And speed is important. So is quality. You have to find the middle ground there, and doing little things like that will help you. Thanks. She went back to work on the pasta salad she'd been preparing as a possibility for the wedding. She added lots of chicken to the mix, so it would be hearty, but still good cold. She worked quickly and methodically, watching over John and showing him tips where possible. She jumped in a couple of times and helped him when it got busy, but mainly she was concerned with coming up with what to cook for the reception. If she could get that out of the way, then she could really concentrate on her menu for the restaurant. At 6, she wandered out to see if Jake and Dusty were there. They were talking with the hostess, and Jake lifted a hand in a wave. She took a deep breath, trying to block out the old cliché her mother had shared with her dozens of times: the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. She didn't want Jake's heart, did she? She gave them 5 minutes to get their drinks, and then she carried out 2 small plates. She started with the pasta salad, putting a bit in front of each of them. Not wanting to overwhelm them with too much food, she had opted to make 6 small plates for each of them. "Hey, Dusty," she said as she set the plates down in front of the 2 men. "Long time no see." "That's because you wouldn't go out with me again. Do you know how much it hurt to be rejected by you?" It was all Melinda could do not to roll her eyes. She felt Jake's gaze on her, and she looked back at him. She wasn't going for an "I told you so" look, but it may have come across that way. "I'll be back in about 15 minutes with the next plate." Every 15 minutes for the next hour and a half, she carried out small plates to them. Finally, when their taste test was over, she took them each a big slice of huckleberry cheesecake. "Do you have strong preferences about what you liked best?" They both gave their favorites, and she nodded, smiling that they agreed with each other. Jake looked at his watch. "It's 8. It took her a moment to realize what she was saying, and she grinned. "What I wouldn't give to be a fly on the wall." He nodded. "I agree." He studied her for a moment. "What are you doing tomorrow night?" She shrugged. "I have the early shift tomorrow, so nothing much." "Why? Can I take you to supper at the pub?" Melinda was surprised to feel blood rushing to her face. "I'd like that. I'll pick you up at 6. Wear shoes comfortable for dancing." She nodded and hurried away, stopping to talk to the woman who had been waiting on the 2 men. "No charge for table 23. They were my guinea pigs." Angela nodded. "No problem." Melinda breezed back into the kitchen and stepped into the huge commercial freezer. She had to cool off before she exploded. She was going out with Jake Quinn, and she was excited. Asterisk. Jackson texted Jake early the next morning. "Meet me for breakfast. I need to talk." "Where?" "You tell me, native boy." Jake shook his head. Jackson was a mess. "Restaurant at the hotel." "Fine. Be there in 10. Jake quickly showered and dressed, driving to the hotel. His beard was getting scruffy looking, and he hoped it would fill in before the wedding. He was going to have to shave it and start over otherwise. Jackson was waiting for him in the lobby, and the 2 of them walked to the back of the hotel, where the restaurant was. Jake was having a hard time figuring out what to call it, because it was currently Bob's, but it was going to be Impressions, which he liked a lot better. As soon as they were seated, Jake leaned back. "How'd the serenade go?" "She called me a goat and told me I have the singing ability of a cockroach." Jackson grinned. "She's warming up to me." Jake stared at him for a moment, and then he realized Jackson was right. That did mean Ambrosia was warming up to him. She didn't always express herself the same way real people did. "That's great. Anyway, I want to go buy a ring, but I'm not sure what she'd like. She knows so much about gemstones and stuff, and I know nothing." So, you want advice from me on what kind of engagement ring to buy her? Jake asked. Glancing up, he saw Melinda standing there, grinning at him. Couldn't stay away? I think I told you about my former sergeant? This is Jackson, and this is Melinda. She is the chef here. Oh good. Would you tell me what kind of engagement ring a woman like Ambrosia would like? That's a tough question, Melinda said, avoiding Jake's gaze. Maybe you should check with Jake's sister Riley. She knows a lot more about crystals than I do. Great idea, Jake said, picking up his phone. He tapped his sister's number and waited for her to answer. Hey, Riley, I have a crystal question for you. Riley sounded sleepy. Sure. What is it? My buddy from the Marines wants to ask Ambrosia to marry him, but he wants the ring to be something she would recognize as a ring of love. He heard sputtering on the other end of the phone. You need to lead up to that. Sorry. I didn't think you'd mind. I don't mind at all, but I sure wasn't expecting that. There was silence for a moment. Does he want love or passion? Both. Then tell him to have a special ring made with moonstone and sapphire. It'll look odd, but Ambrosia will eat it up with a spoon. I'll tell him. Thanks, sis. Is that the guy who was serenading her last night? You heard about that? Jake asked, trying not to laugh. Ambrosia described it as caterwauling and yelled at him to stop. When he didn't, she threw her pink fuzzy bedroom slipper at him. Those two are quite the pair. Sounds lovely. Okay, I'll talk to you soon. He pushed end on his phone. She said you want moonstone and sapphire. She thinks it'll look unique, just like Ambrosia. Do you two want to order something? Melinda asked, biting her lip. I want a couple of breakfast burritos. Do you do them here? Jake asked. I can. What about you, Jackson? Oh, I'll take the same. I'm so lovesick, I'm just picking at my food anyway. Melinda hurried away, obviously not trusting her voice to not give away her laughter about the whole Ambrosia situation. Jake leaned forward. So, Riley said those two stones together will promote both love and passion. I figured that would be more of what you were looking for. Jackson nodded emphatically. Passion is important to me. After the impromptu breakfast, Jake suggested that Jackson could have the ring made easier in Lewiston, so the other man headed off to commission it immediately. Jake stared after him, wondering what it was going to take to get the man to find his mind again. Instead of going home, he drove to Earth Mother and went inside, more to check and see if Ambrosia wanted to kill him for bringing Jackson into her store. The woman had roses all over the place, including one tucked behind each ear. She was humming under her breath and looked dreamy-eyed. Well, if it isn't Bobling. What are you doing here? Bring another friend to drive me crazy? Jake shrugged. I didn't know he was going to drive you crazy, Miss Ambrosia. Well, he is. He was on my doorstep caterwauling like a dying cat last night. And he had a band to back him up. What kind of man does that? She asked him, her hands on her hips. Only the kind who is madly in love. Jackson has deep feelings for you. That man has no more depth to him than a rain puddle. For all her complaining, she looked as smitten as Jackson had. Well, as long as the two of you are happy. I never once said I was happy. You listen about as well as he does. She shook her head. Any idea what he's planning next, so I can decide if I need to make an emergency visit to my niece in Hawaii? Jake shook his head. No idea at all. Humph,